Well, welcome again to another session of our discussions of the revised social principles and my summary of the discussion. So today we talked about economic justice, particularly the three areas of responsible consumerism, farming and agricultural production, and the dignity of work. We started out looking at sort of the preface for the section on economic justice, and it begins with, again, a quote from Wesley's sermon on the use of money. And it's a very emphatic, very strong, it's got lots of exclamation points. It is just filled with this entreaty, this desire for us to do good. And specifically, some of the things it says are no more sloth, no more waste, no more covetousness, but do good. And I talked about how, going back to some of Wesley's foundational ideas, one of the things we sometimes say about how Wesley talked about money was that all of us should work and earn all that we can. We shouldn't be lazy, but our work is good and we should be doing it. But then also, we shouldn't be wasting the money that we earn. We should be saving it. And that doesn't mean like saving it in a bank account so that it's never used and no one ever sees it and we amass great wealth, but rather we should be being thrifty, careful with what we spend. In this particular section of the sermon, he says, cut off every expense which fashion, caprice, or flesh and blood demand. Now, I don't think he's talking about food, but he's talking about those things that we say we want, but we may not really need. And he goes on to say, no more covetousness, but employ whatever God has entrusted you with in doing good. And that's a wonderful way of thinking about it, so that we are to earn what we can, we're to save by not wasting our money, but then with all that we have saved and all that we have earned, we're to do as much good and to be as generous as we can with others. We then talked about the opening line of this section on economic justice and the preface to it. It says our commitment to achieving economic justice is rooted in the covenantal understanding that God's creation is meant to be shared by all humans and sentient beings, which is an interesting phrase in a lot of ways. There's this sense of covenant with creation, but it also this idea of sharing it not just with humans, but with sentient beings. And what does sentient mean? Well, it's thinking. So this is a reminder that we are connected to creation, not just in a general way, but to those other animals which think and have life, and how we interact with them is important. So I had us do a little exercise, because one of the dangers in having conversations like this is that people become afraid of voicing when they have differences of opinion. So I had us take that statement I just read and play devil's advocate. Let's say we don't believe that. How would you argue that we should not share God's creation with all human beings and sentient beings? And I will say this generated some rather heated discussion, because every time someone did play the devil's advocate, someone wanted to argue with them back about the why we should. It's very hard for us all to take up that perspective of sharing. But we talked about such things as not wanting to share across racial lines, not wanting to share across national lines, religious lines. Maybe we only want to share with Christians, that we're supposed to take care of each other first, or in our household and families, but not with outsiders. And in general, what we kept having to do over and over again was define who we should share with and who we shouldn't. And so in playing devil's advocate, we took on these roles of reducing who's in the sharing and who's not. And most of us were quite uncomfortable with that. We didn't like that direction of sharing things. it it just doesn't feel good to cut out certain people and say it's okay for you to not prosper. It's okay if we abuse you as a group of people versus another group of people. But it did generate, again, every time someone started playing devil's advocate, others wanted to argue back. And so there was it's clear for me anyway that we have a hard time just listening to an alternate perspective in this. And it helped us a little bit to do that, but also made us talk about, can we be can we sit and listen to someone whose ideas make us uncomfortable? And are we able to do that and stay strong in ourselves, but are we able to listen to people who have different perspectives? Not easy stuff. Very hard, in fact. So then we went on to begin talking about responsible consumerism. The section here on responsible consumerism talks about a ton of different subjects. Let me just name a few of them. It talks about equitable compensation, sustainability, fossil fuels, exploitative labor practices, peaceful and nonviolent resistance, influence of corporate policies, and developed nations' use of natural resources. And then we started talking about people's experiences of this. And most of our experience of responsible consumerism was in knowing people who didn't shop at certain stores or wouldn't buy certain products because they knew or had heard that they were not produced in ethical ways, or that they were produced. Some didn't want to shop outside the United States. We've known people who didn't want to shop for goods outside the United States. This isn't calling for that level of discernment. It's really talking about more of making sure that the products we buy are produced in places where the workers are treated well and not exploited. But we did get into some of that as we were talking about this, because we know people who that's their idea of responsible consumerism. We also talked quite a bit about having jobs moved outside of our country and why companies do that. So a number of people whose jobs have been outsourced to other countries, and knowing that the employers were paying far less, perhaps not having to meet safety regulations, not having to meet environmental regulations in those new places, and feeling like those moves were justified only by profit and not for means of doing good. So that was sort of people's experience of that. And then listening and coming back to consumerism, one of the issues that was also raised is it's impossible for us to know all of this. We simply can't know all of every product's history, and so we have to give ourselves some grace in perhaps we may make a mistake. Perhaps we may be buying food from a place that should be producing food for themselves instead of exporting it. There were so many things that were involved in this that we really had to say, we don't always know all of this. And we could become so obsessed by thinking about what we buy and where we buy it that we no longer are able to flourish in our own lives. But at the same time, realizing that this is important for us to be aware of and to begin thinking about in our consumerism. So it created some difficulties for us in terms of conflicting feelings. We then moved on to farming and agricultural production, and much of this section talks about the difference between family farms and small farms, and the monopolization that is being created by large agribusiness. One person noted that just because something's large doesn't mean it's bad, and we have to acknowledge that that is true. However, what this statement isn't saying that just because they're bad just because they're big, they're bad. Sorry about that. But rather points out specific things that can become issues when companies grow large. In particular, one of them that this mentions is that agribusinesses can use the best land for production of exportable crops rather than using resources to feed local populations. And so when we see this in a worldwide level, there are places that produce lots and lots of exports of, say, palm oil or we could list all kinds of things. Beef was another one that was mentioned, but the people themselves don't actually gain food or support from what is grown in the area. And so then that food needs to be imported, which is quite expensive for some of these places. And so we also talked about how large businesses sometimes, some of the things that they need to be aware of are environment, workers, care, and safety, and how sometimes in getting big, corporations miss some of those things. We talked about some of the people's experience of small farms. We talked about some local farmers that are trying to do things in organic ways and how we can support those local and small farms, people we know, and that are trying to address some of these issues of pesticides and herbicides and to create sustainable agriculture. So we talked about a lot of things. We had some that had experienced farming as children and how much farming has changed since then. How you used to, actually barter. You'd trade your hay for a side of pork. And it's just not that way anymore. Finally, we got into the dignity of work, which is an area I think all of us, work is something that all of us have experience in. And essentially, this section on dignity of work talks about how good work is good. People, human beings, need work. And it says that it's a way for us to contribute to the flourishing of our families and contribute to the common good. So work is a good thing because we build up the people around us. We produce things which are good and useful for others. So that work, when it is at its best, is a wonderful and good thing. But that work can also be degrading, and sometimes employment and employers are not the best. There's a lot of things listed in this section on dignity of work. I invite you to take a look at it. It is quite the list. But we spent a lot of time instead talking about our experiences of work and when we felt that the work was dignified and when we felt it wasn't. One of the most interesting ones was a person who had worked at Walmart who was doing cleaning and felt great dignity in the work that they were doing. It felt like they were contributing to the cleanliness of the store and that what they were doing was making a difference, but that others around them looked at that work as beneath them, as something that wasn't what they should be doing, that they should be doing something more. And so that was interesting as we started to think about some of the judgments we make on other people in the jobs that they do. They may feel that this job is dignified and what they're doing is important, and others may look down on them for doing that kind of work. And we need to think about how we treat people who are doing work that is vitally important, but may not be what is perhaps the socially most accepted or wonderful work. We talked about people that pick up our garbage and some of those other workers that need to be thanked because they're doing vital and important work for our community, but sometimes maybe aren't looked upon so well. Let's see, what else did we talk about? We came up with some, most people, I would say, had very positive experiences in their workplace. They really felt that their work was dignified. The couple of examples we came up with and the negative was a boss who asked the employee to lie and putting the customers at risk, and another that it wasn't the boss or the workplace that was the negative experience, but it was the people. It was in doing a job which required interacting with the public, and sometimes the public did not treat that person with dignity, but treated them quite poorly. And again, that got us back to thinking about one of the things that's important in this dignity to work section is how do we treat the people that we encounter each day in their workplaces, and are we treating them with that dignity? So as much as there's all this stuff about other things, which is vitally, vitally important in this list, it also reminded us that every day we're interacting with people in their labor, and we have a choice of how we treat them ourselves. And so a very simple thing of how do we treat people well and be thankful for what they're doing for us as we interact with people. It was a great section, good conversations, no easy answers. Everything here was complex and difficult, but appreciating that it keeps these things in front of us as we consider what is best practice for us as we go about our daily lives. So very practical stuff this time. Next time we'll be talking about Sabbath and renewal time, which is page 18, and corporate responsibility, which is page 19, and I'm sure that there will be some vast differences of approach in that section. And then we're going to go back to the section that somehow I skipped on creation and our care for creation, which begins on page 9. Thank you for spending time with us again today, and have yourselves a very blessed day. Bye now.